I believe I can fly.
The last flight might honestly be the grandest call to arms tale, where most of the actors barely do anything at all. Don't misread, I love the message behind this story, and it has easily one of the most inspirational protagonists for a war story. Yet it does have some painfully slow pacing, and is not as riveting as it thinks it gets. But let's take it from the top. We follow a British fighter pilot named Lieutenant William Terry Decker, who is battling during the fight of all fights, World War I. But in a scuffle, he accidentally takes a wrong turn into a time portal and ends up in modern day.
Dun dun dun!
Yep, another old school Twilight Zone time travel plot. But thankfully, it doesn't get as confusing as other time jump mishaps do. Lieutenant Decker ends up captured by the modern American Air Force and brought in for questioning, where we spend most of this journey at the Air Base office as the US commanders exchange banter with Decker over who he is and how he got here. Despite my love for this episode, it is a very dialogue-heavy story, with a little too much telling and very little showing. I'm sad to report to you all that this episode is not winning a perfect score, mostly because of the long exposition dumps and the fact that this tale feels more like a play rather than a visual epic. Luckily, I can safely say the ending saves it. Lieutenant Decker informs the US soldiers that he's a British pilot and was combating those evil Germans before being portaled here. He essentially spends most of his screen time detailing his odd background, and we get an understanding of who this man is. There is a lot of the classic "they don't believe him" trope, but the show does ditch it as quick as possible. Lieutenant Decker eventually confesses the truth, that he was a coward who abandoned the Allies once the Germans gained the upper hand, and the real reason he got lost and tripped into the time portal was because he was flying away from the battlefield. Decker was deserting his post because he's a coward, and I know something about cowards. But rather out of nowhere, the US troops reveal that the air marshal of this base also served during World War I, a man named Alexander Mackay, who was, of course, Lieutenant Decker's ally, who he was supposed to meet up before the Germans attacked.
Hey, what a coinkydink.
And here's where the story actually gets good. The US troopers and Decker discuss what happened that fateful day prior to his time jump. Air Marshal Mackay served as a low-level soldier down on the German front, and just when it seemed the Ally unit was doomed, a mysterious fighter pilot came along just in time to save the day. And that pilot gave up his life to rescue many souls that tragic evening.
I was that baby.
That doesn't make any sense.
I'm Brav Zachlin!
Yep, the episode implies that Lieutenant Decker was the war hero who changed history, and the arc becomes about the deserter being forced to decide if he wants to hide and cower in the comforts of modern day, or return back in time to sacrifice his life to allow his fellow soldiers to live. Naturally, Lieutenant Decker breaks out of the joint to go back and ensure that those innocent soldiers survive, since despite being afraid for his life, he won't allow others to die in his place. This was shockingly sweet and pretty badass, since Decker undergoes a sincere character arc where he stops being a selfish wuss and makes the ultimate sacrifice. I absolutely like it.
Turn it up, Decker, or fire!
Oh, fire! I'd rather die.
I kind of wish we got more stuff like this in the episode as a whole, over all the long talking. The lack of action doesn't give the arc the justice it deserves, as it starts so boring, The slow exposition is the weakest part of this story, but the dramatic climax honestly salvages what would have been a meh episode. There's an empowering tone at the end of this, where a scared boy evolves into a man, which definitely helps this atonement arc stand out among others from this saga. So Decker does the time warp again and restores history, where we see the now elderly Air Marshal Mackay confirming that the British Time Lord was real after all, and how he valiantly saved his men that day, turning Decker into a legend. This episode has a great theme, but it does take some time waiting to reach it. I like this one, since it gives me Memphis vibes, with some loser schmuck evolving into a noble person who did change a life after all. Yet unlike that gem, this episode does lack a more emotional core, since it squanders so much time setting up the big spectacle. Personally, I do love the message here, where a person has to shape their own destiny instead of giving up and putting your fears above what really matters. I think it's inspirational how Lieutenant Decker accepts his demise rather than leave poor souls to perish when he could help, since that's something most should aspire to. So I can find it in my stone cold heart to give it a Gold Medal of Honor. Sadly, not a perfect score, because the boring moments are still boring moments, which do weigh this vehicle down something fierce. But the destination is certainly worth the trip. The last flight hits some rough terrain, yet it has enough power helping it soar majestically.
Maybe it wasn't an accident that I landed here. Maybe I was brought here for a purpose, to find out that time was giving me a second chance.
The Twilight